Welcome to So and So, brought to you by Bernina, made to create. I'm Meg Goodman, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with a special member of the sewist and quilting community. A conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. Our guest today is Carson Converse, an artist, designer, and quilter who is currently working on her second collection with Hermes. She designed her first quilt while in kindergarten in the early 80s when Little House on the Prairie was popular, and even though she didn't have a TV, she learned all she needed to know through reading and at school. Though she was interested in quilts at an early age, her childhood sewing did not include quilts, as she made her first quilt shortly after graduating from college. After studying sculpture, her interest in the decorative arts and architecture led her to complete a master's degree in interior design. Fueled by curiosity and a passion for the creative process, she continues to work in a range of disciplines, often blurring the line between craft, fine art, and design. Forward-thinking yet grounded in tradition, Carson's work embodies a dynamic, modern sensibility. Carson has been quilting for more than 20 years and makes her home in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts. Her award-winning work has been shown at venues around the world. Hi, Carson, and welcome to So and So.
Hi, thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about this. I've seen pictures of your work. It is gorgeous, and we're gonna get into all of that. But I want to start out about asking you to tell us how you learned to sew and quilt.
Sure. Well, I learned to sew through my mother. When I was younger, she made all our clothes, and so I watched her and sort of pick things up. She also sent us to classes, and so I did also learn quite a bit through that. As far as quilts, I remember when I was in kindergarten, we had this it was like a small design wall, basically a little portable easel, probably about 16 inches wide, that they had covered with felt, and then the school had cut up pieces of fabric, so squares of fabric, triangles, and we could just kind of move them around on the design wall.
Hmm.
And I love the process. And it was just one of my favorite toys there. And then one day, I went to school, and my best friend had a little doll quilt that had been sewn out of her squares that she had put together on that design wall. And I will admit, insanely jealous of that quilt. I really wanted it to be my quilt. And while I understood, my friend's mother actually ran the kindergarten, so I understood that the reason that she, our teacher had made this quilt was because it was her daughter. But in my head, that was a little bit confused, and I just felt like I wanted my quilt to be made into a doll quilt. So my mother took that opportunity to teach me about quilts, and she had made some quilts before I was born, and I grew up surrounded by quilts. And I heard the stories about how she had made quilts, but I had actually never seen her make a quilt. But she walked me through that process. So she brought out some grid paper. She showed me how to draft a quilt out on the grid paper, gave me colored pencils, and so I spent some time drawing out different arrangements of pretty simple quilts. Then she brought me to the fabric store. I got to pick out the fabric, and I believe she sewed it together. I don't think I had anything to do with making the quilt, but I remember that grid paper. I remember really loving the grid paper, and that process of taking simple geometry and all the different options you could make out of a square and a triangle. And it's still something that really appeals to me through the process of making quilts. That sort of, I think, made me love the process, but for whatever reason, I actually didn't get back to quilts until I graduated from college.
So, in what you create, you've said that you're drawn toward minimalism, but love intricate detail, and have I love this a natural tendency toward chaos.
Mm.
And you said you like to strip away noise until you find the essence of a piece. And your goal is to create pieces that are simple yet contain enough interest to invite the viewer to slow down and look closer. I love this description. Can you tell us more about this?
Sure. I am not a minimalist by nature, and I tend to work in a very messy way, and I tend to collect a lot of information before I start. But I really value minimalism. I value simplicity. And so it's something that I strive for. And so I consider my process a reductive process or reductive art
Hmm.
in the sense that I'm starting with a lot and then I'm really focusing on what is important. What am I trying to say? What is necessary to be in that quilt in order to say what I want to say? When I make pieces, I really I want to give the viewer kind of a moment of stillness, maybe an opportunity to catch their breath. And so I'm trying to, as I strip things away, I'm still trying to give them enough to pull them in, to maybe capture their attention. And I like playing with that. I like playing with having a piece that feels pretty minimalist, but as you approach it, you just discover more detail, or as you walk around it, it shifts. And so there's a lot there if you take the time to look at it.
Is this process a straight line, or is it back and forth, and you move things and then put them back? And so, is it more of a dance or walking a straight road?
Oh, I don't do anything in a straight line. I'm all over the place. So yeah, it's a lot of times I'll start by just throwing a lot of stuff on the wall. I have big design walls in my studio. And if I don't have a set direction in mind, I might put up pieces that are in progress that I wasn't sure what direction they were going in. I might just throw fabric up on the wall. I might throw inspirational images up there. And then I do weed it out, but then I'll come back and add. And so I tend to have a process where things expand and then they contract and then they expand. But ultimately, my goal is to have a piece that feels quiet and still.
And in kindergarten, you learned to work on a design wall.
I did, yeah. That was my first experience and first love of that.
Hmm.
And same thing of just pulling different things out and moving them around,
Sure.
seeing what happened.
Now, working in this medium, you've said is your way of acknowledging and paying tribute to the work of women that have influenced you. And you say that their work has been historically been undervalued. So, who are some of these women, and how was their work undervalued?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have names for the women. And this is because a lot of the work that has inspired me was created by women who didn't label their work. It wasn't something that was necessarily done. So there's quite a few quilts, particularly Amish quilts, that I've studied for a long time, but I don't know who made them. I don't know the story behind them. And that's quite different than what would happen within the art world, where things would be labeled and you'd know a lot of background history. So for me, a lot of it is when I work, I think about those women. I think about how much they've contributed to my work, and I try to continue their legacy through my work. Uh, there's also a bit of the aspect when I first started getting press, the tagline often was not your grandma's quilt. And that really irks me because, of course,
Hmm.
women have been making really amazing contemporary quilts for a long time. And so I think part of what I do is also trying to shine light on the amazing work that's been done before me.
Now, let's dig a little deeper into some work that was nameless, and that was the work of the Giesben quilters. Mary Margaret Petway from Giesben has been a guest on this podcast, and it was just a beautiful episode to listen to how that group has grown and the work they have done. You're familiar with them. What influences this group's work had on yours?
Well, it was the show at the Whitney was very critical for me because that was one of the first times I personally saw quilts on the wall in a museum. Up until that point, I'd been told that quilts could not be art, and clearly their work was art. Clearly, I saw a clear connection between those quilts and the work that I had been admiring, that was had been defined by others as art. So for me, that was really eye opening, and shifted the way I thought about quilts. Also, the especially the work cloth quilts and the older quilts that showed signs of wear, I was really pulled to that. The way that the person who had worn that fabric had left a mark on the fabric and therefore on the quilt. There's kind of a soul to them, and in a way that the fabric was distressed and had a life that wasn't possible in a new commercial fabric. And so that really stuck with me as well, and is something that I think about a lot as I work.
Do you use special fabrics in your quilts?
I do. I use a lot of different fabrics. So I will sometimes start with a commercial fabric and I will put it through a lot of processes. So I will dye it, I will discharge dye it, I will print on it, just to try to get that look. I will also use fabrics that have belonged to somebody I know, used fabrics, as well as wool, silk, really anything I get my hands on. I'm really trying to push the materiality of my quilts through the use of fabric.
Hmm. Now, when you studied fine arts, you studied them at Boston University, which is a classically oriented program. And you comment that it gave you a strong foundational background in art and taught you to think critically about your work. But the program also instilled many biases that have been hard for you to let go of. What are these biases? Talk more about these.
Sure. Well, the program, and I should say that I had many wonderful professors there, but there was also, we were taught that there was sort of a hierarchy in the art world. And this might be something as simple as oil paints are better than acrylic paints, and acrylic paints are for hobbyists. And if you want to be taken seriously, you need to use oil paints. Um, Anything functional, we were told, was not art. Um, Certainly, quilts would not have been art. And we really anything commercial was also somehow lesser. And that sort of thinking, especially as somebody who is interested in quilts and women's work, it stuck with me more than I'd like to admit. I recognize that it was wrong. There's a few things that really stood out even at the time. For example, one of my professors told me that I should stay away from watercolor because it's something old ladies did in their free time.
Hmm.
Um, and I knew that didn't feel right. I knew I was going to be an old lady. And I knew I knew it wasn't right, but it still sunk in a little bit more than I'd like to admit. So
Hmm.
trying to erase some of that thinking has been quite hard, and it's influenced some of my decisions, in my career. And it's something I'm trying to let go of. And I think also, for reference, I graduated in 2000, and the G's Ben show at the Whitney was in 2002. And I think that show really changed a lot within the art industry as a whole. And I think my relearning what art is has also sort of been mirrored in the general art world as well, which is great.
You know, it's interesting. We were just at the 2022 Houston International Quilt Festival, and there was a lot of conversation about what you just mentioned. What is acceptable? What is old-fashioned? Conversation about watercolor quilts or our quilts art. And there seems to be shifting or maybe an opening up in the quilt world about accepting more things as art. Are you seeing this movement in the quilt world yourself with your work or others around you?
I am. I think I still see a lot of rules out there, and they shift. What is acceptable, what is not acceptable, sometimes shifts. But you'll see new rules come in. So I do see progress, and I'm really excited about it. But I think we still have to be really careful to question some of the rules that we come up with and some of the ways that we think about how we define things.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I think we're all, in this long continuum of quilting. So there's a lot of discussion about modern quilts versus traditional quilts, and in my mind, I understand that we have to define them to some extent, but in some sense, they're all the same thing.
So where do these rules come from?
Oh, I don't know. Human nature, I guess.
Sure, as in
Yeah,
any art
yeah, and
form.
they're similar.
Mm-hmm.
I see art quilts coming, or the art quilt community kind of coming out of maybe not being accepted by the general art community, and yet coming up with similar types of rules. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how we get over that, but do our best, I guess.
There's artists out there. Your work. There's Bisa Butler. There's Michael C. Thorpe. So many that are now really gaining traction for quilts as an art form. Uh, but it took you a long time to love quilts. And it's really only been in the past 5 or 6 years that you truly learned to love this art form. What shifted the way you think about your work?
Well, I think for me, when I started making quilts, I really was focused on the design aspect and piecing. And so I made the tops. Um, when I started thinking about the quilting more, or I should say that when I was making the tops, I would then get to the point where I got to quilting, which is the stitching together of the layers. And my goal in quilting was to not mess up my quilt. And and with that goal in mind, I really didn't love quilts, because that process of turning fabric into a quilt was my least favorite part of quilting. And that's really what made it a quilt. And once I shifted and I started focusing more on the quilting, and I had a goal of thinking about it from the start, designing around the quilting, and that started opening up the possibilities for what a quilt could be. And at one point, it just clicked in my brain that I wasn't making quilts, I was making cloth.
Hmm.
And I don't know why that shifted my thinking, but it really opened up the possibilities for how I approached quilts,
Mm-hmm.
and what was possible. And I really started loving it. And for a while, that my quilts flattened out a little bit. I was doing a lot of dense stitching, and they weren't particularly quilt-like. But I've come back now into quilts that are much more traditional quilts, have the aspects of quilts, and I still love them. But it just took that shift, to thinking about it as making cloth versus making a quilt, that, I don't know, something clicked.
And it's working for you.
It's working.
Hey, it's Jedi Amanda. You know that dream studio you have in your head with every machine, notion, and accessory you want? We've all got one, and I just designed mine at BerninaSweepstakes.com. You can design your own too and then win it. I'm a cosplayer, so this was an ideal situation for me to design my own studio. It was super cool, down to the giant mirrors and lighting and sewing machines that I have in my dream studio. Make sure you're in it to win Bernina's Dream Studio $100,000 giveaway. Design your own dream studio at BerninaSweepstakes.com today. Dream it, design it, win it.
One of the things that this podcast really focuses on is community. And you've said that you're really grateful to have found my people within the quilting community. So who are these my people, and what's your inspiration and sense of community with them?
I think I'm an introvert, like many quilters, and was working alone. And then one year I went to QuiltCon, and there's something about being in a room with a lot of people who share a passion with you. And I think also helped by social media, because we had some familiarity with each other, which I think as an introvert, when you've had some sort of casual, safe social media interactions. It makes it easier to go up to somebody in person.
Mm-hmm.
But while I was there, I constantly felt like I was meeting my new best friend or somebody that I had known for years. And it just felt really comfortable. And those friendships have lasted. Some have,
Mm-hmm.
there are people now that I have monthly, weekly calls with that I met through social media and then QuiltCon, and other people that I feel like I could call up. I may not talk to them, but I feel very comfortable knowing that I could ask them a question if I needed it to have information regarding industry, quilts, really anything. So,
Now, as an introvert, this is interesting. Have you ever been in a position where you're exhibiting your work, you're standing there talking about it, and you are experiencing people experiencing your work? What's that like?
it's weird. So I have to admit, at QuiltCon, I don't share a lot of photos of myself online. And so for the first few years, I could walk through and people wouldn't know who I was.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hide my badge. So I would pull my sweater over my name tag or flip it over. And so I could witness that more as a fly on the wall. It's weird when I'm connected to the quilt. I don't know, it's surreal.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about your inspirations. Mark Rothko is an early inspiration, and nature is an inspiration for you. Talk about these.
Um, well, I remember Mark Rothko has been a continuous inspiration from childhood through art school and to today. And I think there's just something powerful about the size of the work, the color. It feels spiritual. And he's playing with sort of pushing and pulling you into the painting through color. And that is something that I try to do in my own work. And it's actually something that I see a lot in nature. And so I'm pulling the same type of information my from nature and the inspirations that come from nature as I would from his paintings.
Mm-hmm.
For example, looking into a pine forest, there's just this like cool, intense, soft color that just draws you in, or a field where there's just endless grass and it's kind of slowly moving and the way the color shifts. That sort of thing is what I'm thinking about when I'm making my pieces.
Mm-hmm. So you want people to um, viscerally feel your work.
Yeah, yeah. I think probably the one of the best comments I've had on my work is somebody told me that when she saw my work, she stopped and she took a deep breath. And that really was, it meant a lot for her to say that. It just, because that's kind of what I want to happen.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your work with Hermes. Tell us about it.
Well, I've worked on two collections with them. Um, both collections are based on designs and artwork by Gianpaolo Pagni. The first one is a series of three quilts. They're whole cloth quilts in the most creamy white cashmere. Um, they're stitched out in a gold thread, and the effect is really quite stunning. The fabric it's soft. There's a sheen to it, so you just really see those the texture of the quilting really comes out in the light and as it moves, and yet it also just it absorbs light and reflects it back at the same time. It's pretty magical. Um, those were first shown or announced in fall of 2021 at the Milan Design Week. They were originally supposed to be announced at the show in spring of 2020, which of course was canceled due to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a delay there. And then the recent piece is much more colorful. It's a pieced quilt, also in cashmere. And that was shown in June, also in Milan.
And the way you describe them of dynamic motion is perfect for you because that's how you want people to experience your work.
Yes, yeah, it was very exciting to get to work with the cashmere because it's just a very special material as far as how it interacts with the light and how it highlights quilting.
So, Carson, share with us how you were discovered by Hermes and how you felt when you found out you were going to work with them.
Sure. So, to understand how I felt when I found out I was going to work with them, there's a little bit of backstory. I had a long term goal of working with Hermes, and this goes back to when I was first starting my, I guess it's my second iteration of my quilting career.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was working as an interior designer in New York, and my career was going well, but I was really burnt out. And so I was thinking about what my next steps were. And I had this vision that I could create a quilting business that catered to interior designers. But I knew it was going to be really hard, and I wasn't quite sure if I could do it. And in that sort of process of transitioning from interior design into quilting and having a lot of anxiety about whether or not I was making the right decision, I had a conversation with my then boss and mentor. And she was discouraging me from making that move. And during that conversation, she basically implied that I was my decision to leave New York and make quilts was me going to F off in the woods, was her words.
Mm.
And right after that conversation, I went for a walk and I picked up a magazine and I opened the magazine and there was an article about Alison Berger. Now, Alison Berger is a glass artist who works in lighting. And I was very familiar with her work. She was inspirational to me as far as a model, a business model. Even though we were in different crafts, I really appreciated the way she combined craft, design, and I sort of saw my quilts being in the same space as her glassworks.
Mm-hmm.
And this article specifically got into her work with Hermes. And at that moment, I just thought, I am going to do this. I'm going to show everybody I can do it. And I'm going to work with a company like Hermes. And so fast forward a few years later, and I have not really intentionally tried. I haven't reached out to Hermes. I haven't really done anything towards that goal. And out of the blue, I get an email saying, are you interested in collaborating with Hermes on a quilt?
Just out of the blue.
Just out of the blue. And I don't know how they discovered me. I'm not great at asking questions, but I was just I didn't want to jinx it. I was just like, what? Mm-hmm. So I went with it. And the second question too in the email was, are you willing to work with cashmere? And for me, before I got that email, I was really thinking about how I wanted to be working in wool. I wanted to be making whole cloth quilts. I wanted to really make a luxurious whole cloth quilt. And so for them, mm-hmm. specifically them, to reach out to me and then give me this opportunity to work on this project that I might not have been able to do on my own, as far as working with cashmere, it was incredible, and the timing was perfect.
It's amazing how things work out as they should.
Yeah, I've been incredibly lucky on that.
So let's talk about sustainability. It's always been important to you. So tell us how it's important and what effect it has on your work.
So I'm not sure exactly where this comes from, but I do know I was very interested in reuse growing up. And I don't know, I read a lot of depression sort of era books too. And I was really obsessed with the idea of finding trash and turning it into treasure. I also did a lot outdoors, and I spent a lot of time outdoors, and the idea of not destroying our environment was very important to me. Currently in my work, it comes out in two ways. One is that it's very important to me that the pieces I make are they're heirloom quality and not just casually heirloom quality. I think about, I have this visual of if you were to purchase one of my quilts, that your children would sort of fight over wanting that quilt, that it's something that people still will want generations from now.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that's really sort of the most sustainable thing you can do, is to create pieces that people want to keep, that they want to repair. But I also work towards a zero waste practice. So I force myself to use every last bit of material, and that's forced me to actually come up with some creative outcomes for that. So right now, I'm working on using all my little cuttings, because when you long arm, you end up with a lot of thread cuttings. And so I have boxes of it, and I'm thinking, how can I use that thread in a project? I've come up with I don't typically do improv quilts, but I've been doing some improv quilts with some of my scraps, because I need to use them up. And so that it's
Mm-hmm.
created new pieces that I might not have happened upon if I didn't have that challenge to myself.
Carson, what's next for you? What's your dream?
Well, next is my goal is to become a little bit more strategic about the work that I'm creating. I have been a little passive and letting things come to me, and I've been lucky, but I think I want to become a little bit more strategic. And my dream that I hope to accomplish in doing that would really be to be able to really focus on the work that excites me. I'd love to just have a studio, lots of design walls, and really make pieces that take long and not have to worry about the business side of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you put it out there about Hermes, and look what happened. So I think when we check in with you in the future, we're going to ask you how this is working out for you. No doubt it's going to happen. Um, we've talked about a lot today. Is there any question I didn't ask that you wish I had?
I can't think of anything.
Okay. This has been a wonderful conversation. I love your story and your work, and we're going to be keeping an eye on you and what's to come. I know that our listeners would like to reach out to you. So what's the best way for them to do so?
The best way would be via email, hello@carsonconverse.com. And they can see my work at carsonconverse.com and also on Instagram at Carson Converse.
Awesome. Carson, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I want to thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Another story about someone just like you. Someone for whom sewing and quilting is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life and a connection to something bigger. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to meg@soandsopodcast.com or just complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to, review, and rate this podcast on your favorite platform, and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank Bernina for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.